What's good? Fo back at you with another video. Today I'm going to be discussing the warrior class in general, how it feels, the changes it has received from BFA, the covenants, conduits, and legendaries for it, and overall gameplay of it. I will be focusing on arms and fury primarily. Sorry boys, really not interested in prot, only focusing on the DPS specs. But we got a lot to discuss, so let's get into it. Warriors will be gaining a number of spells in Shadowlands, poggers in the chat. Biggest one being the addition of spell reflection baseline for both DPS specs. This is massive, 20% magic TR, and the potential to reflect a deadly spell will help with survivability for both. Intervene being baseline now helps with mobility issues that plague the specs in PvP. The use of this ability will vary in degree and could be used to make some potential game-changing plays in certain scenarios. Let's say you see a G-Pie going out at your teammate. You could intervene to that teammate, pop spell reflect, and negate all that damage. Piercing Howl is available to arms now as well. This is a slept on ability and will be useful for kiting, useful for uptime in PvP, and just useful overall. Unfortunately, it has a cooldown now, but the slow has been increased to 70% from 50%, but now only lasts 8 seconds. The cooldown on it is needed, especially with the increased slow now, and will lead to more uptime in PvP, especially with hamstrings still in our toolkit. And the kicker is that it doesn't cost any rage. More unpruning comes with Shattering Throw. This probably won't see that much use. It's only useful for breaking absorb / shields on targets. How often the need for this comes up will be proven in time. Its obvious and most helpful instances where needed will probably be in PvP. Some examples include Ice Block and Divine Shield. Other defensive abilities are given to us as well, the most notable one being Ignore Pain. This will help survivability for both specs, however it does cost a fair amount of rage. The others like Shield Block and Shield Slam are pretty lackluster, and I don't see many uses for them except in some very niche scenarios in PvP. Swapping to a shield mid-combat is cool for fantasy reasons, but I feel like we have shifted too far from that dynamic now to warrant any significance for it. Rallying Cry's health bonus has been increased to 20%, which is definitely nice for all kinds of content. This is just a minor buff to it, can't complain about that. Let's go over arms now specifically. Arms has received a number of changes. Perhaps the most important change to arms is the change to Deep Wounds. Deep Wounds is no longer a passive debuff you can forget about. You will need to maintain the debuff as it will increase your damage to the target. Execute also no longer applies Deep Wounds, meaning Mortal Strike will be weaved into your rotation during Execute phase, sub 20%. This is a welcome change, shifting away from the Uker heavy damage dot class to a more impactful ability spec. Seeing Deep Wounds do like 50% of your damage at the end of a Mythic Plus was cool and all, but now we have to think about our rotation a little bit more. Cleave has also been changed. It replaces Sweeping Strikes and no longer requires a 3 target minimum to inflict Deep Wounds. It will consume your overpower stacks to inflict up to 40% more damage. Cleave will still be your go-to for AoE situations, as it is going to be the most reliable way to spread your Deep Wounds with such a short cooldown. Some other interesting talent changes include Deadly Calm. This ability is pretty interesting as your next 4 rage costing abilities will cost nothing. Pretty fun spam, almost like a mini Lucid. Not sure how good this will be, but it sounds like it could have some potential when we are able to generate more rage consistently later down in the expansion to utilize the increased rage cap. Collateral damage has also been changed. It now increases your next whirlwind for however many times you hit a second target with an ability during your sweeping strikes. This is a change to make it a little bit more AoE oriented, but mainly hurts its 2 target specialty that allowed us to have more rage to work with during sweeping strikes. Dive of the Sword's cooldown has been reduced to 2 minutes. Definitely need that. One of the biggest complaints for arms is its lack of survivability. This is just a nice little bonus to help with that. The parry is very niche and only really useful in competitive PvP against melee. Also, with the added utility in tandem with Ignore Pain, these changes should alleviate some of that lack of survivability. Ravager is now a 45-second cooldown to compete with Blade Storm on a shorter cooldown and will now follow the mobs it is hitting. It does decent damage and can be strong for heavy AoE situations. Dreadnought has been changed to essentially become the Azerite trait Seismic Wave from BFA. Your overpower will gain a charge and cause a Seismic Wave in a line. I think this was pretty bad as the Azerite trait was shit and the projected line aspect of it reduces the practicality of it as you will have to line yourself up with other mobs. Maybe it could have some value in Mythic Plus, but that's about it. Now that we've talked about talents, let's go into gameplay. The core gameplay for arms from BFA's latest patch to Shadowlands is significantly different. Obvious reason for this is the lack of corruption, aka expedient. Less haste is going to make the rotation feel a lot slower, especially when you consider lucid dreams and essences no longer being a thing. And when I mean slower, it's a lot slower. It actually feels terrible. The rage generation is too slow now and you really have to manage it accordingly. But with better gear, this probably will be alleviated a little bit. You will feel rage starved quite frequently, and the only thing you can do sometimes is just wait for your auto attack to finish. When you run out of ways to generate rage with cooldowns like Blade Storm and Leave Charge, you will feel helpless just waiting for them to come off cooldown. Maintaining deep wounds is a huge priority. The 12-second duration on it makes it pretty easy to maintain. You'll want to spend your major abilities while deep wounds is active. Overall, I think this spec has great changes, especially with deep wounds, but it will need some help to get going. It will probably still be the go-to PvP spec just because of Mortal Strike, but it needs way more haste or just some extra bit of power, whether that comes from Legendaries, Conduits, or some other factor to make it not feel slow in my opinion, for it to really pump out some numbers. Fury's core gameplay hasn't changed much. Most changes it has received have been in its talent choices. Rampage has had its cost reduced from 85 to 80 rage. This is a nice change to boost the chances of opening into a Rampage on the opener and keep the rotation more fluid with less whirlwind spamming on single target hopefully. Haste from Enrage has been reduced from 25% to 15%. Pretty big change that reduces the fast-paced gameplay of Fury, but you won't see that much of a difference honestly, especially with some new talent choices and potential legendaries. Recklessness has had its duration increased to 12 seconds, which I guess makes up for it not being off the GCD. It's a pretty weak cooldown overall, but it will line up nicely with Siegebreaker. Bloodthirst healing is now only 3%, down from 5%. Single-minded Fury is also making a comeback. The difference between the two is minimal, and players should use what best weapons they have available to them. Perhaps the biggest change for Fury, though, will be the removal of the Azerite trait, Cold Steel Hot Blood, which was a big factor as to why crit was so big for Fury in BFA. The crit was useful for more rage generation on your Bloodthirst and essential in applying the dot from the Azerite trait. Plus, it just did a shit ton of damage. Some of this does get alleviated with talent choices, though. A lot of talents have been swapped around and changed overall. Fury Slash, Carnage, Inner Rage, and Endless Rage have all been removed. Fresh Meat no longer increases healing and instead guarantees Enrage on the first target you hit with your Bloodthirst and gives 15% more chance to Bloodthirst to trigger Enrage, buffing it to a 45% chance to trigger Enrage. Overall, I think this talent looks pretty solid now. It should lead to higher uptime on Enrage and great for multi-target situations. Frenzy is now mainly a single target talent with potential for 9% increased haste after casting 3 Rampages on the same target. Seethe is a new talent which picks up the rage generation aspect of Cold Steel Hot Blood, giving Bloodthirst more rage generation. Massacre reduces Execute's cooldown by 1.5 seconds and pairs nicely with the Covenant ability Condemn. Meat Cleaver has been changed to improve whirlwind damage now and applies the buff to your next 4 single target attacks. This could be pretty good for Mythic Plus, but we'll see. Frothing Berserker doesn't modify our damage anymore and instead causes our Rampages to have a 20% chance to refund 40 rage. This is a low chance, but could be nutty when it does proc. Reckless Abandon now causes Recklessness to generate 20 more rage and double the damage of our Bloodthirst and Raging Blow and gives them a new effect. Onslaught is a new talent that is only usable while enraged. This seems kind of meh and awkward to use in the rotation as it is currently. Dragon Sword cooldown has been reduced to 30 seconds now and crits for triple damage instead of double. Cruelty is similar to Inner Rage and enhances our Raging Blow. Overall, lots of good changes that help lead to more interesting talent choices rather than the pretty static choices Fury had all throughout BFA. The core gameplay of Fury has hardly changed. The haste reduction from Enrage is slightly noticeable and overall just feels slower, but not too slow unlike ARMS. The haste can also be enhanced through some talents with Frenzy and a Legendary. With crit being lower on the priority list, stacking more haste could be extremely beneficial and smooth out the gameplay. It definitely can pump out some deeps early on, which is a nice contrast to how early BFA felt for it. There will still be some gaps in gameplay where you just can't garner enough rage to go into a Rampage and need to spam Whirlwind, but that's nothing new. The reduced healing on Bloodthirst is hardly noticeable and will still lead to Fury being quite tanky, especially since it's on such a short CD. Let's talk Covenants. Kyrian and Venthyr are the top forerunners from damage numbers currently. Condemn is an insane ability that you get from going with the Venthyr Covenant. It replaces Execute and allows us another window to use it at the start of the fight until 80%. It does so much damage. It's definitely more noticeable for ARMS with it not having a cooldown, but will still be extremely strong for Fury as you can benefit from it with Whirlwind. I think you will always want to take Massacre with this ability, basically allowing you to use it for 55% of a mob's health pool. It also has a defensive aspect to it, preventing some damage from the targets it's used on. This will be big for ARMS, especially in PvP, and picks up some slack for Fury with its reduced healing. The guaranteed rage refund is a nice finishing touch and will help smoothen out both specs rotations. In addition, the general Covenant ability offered from Door of Shadows will be even more utility for all kinds of content. I think its biggest uses will be for PvP for high uptime and Mythic Plus skips, but who knows what kind of creative ways players can utilize this. The Venthyr also have interesting soulbind choices as well, with Nadja and Theotar both offering powerful abilities. Nadja will give you access to Thrillseeker, increasing everything you do by 20%. Theotar offers a versatility benefit whenever you use your class Covenant ability. This ability is actually insane. 10% increased versatility buff for 10 seconds that also buffs your 4 closest allies' versatility by 4%. I think this will be nerfed because if it's based off your class ability and not the general one, this will have insane uptime for classes who have short cooldowns for their class ability. As of right now, I think Venthyr will be the best choice for both specs. It just offers too much right now, and you can get Conduits to enhance Condemn even more. Kyrian is another solid choice. Spear of Bastion is another unique ability that tethers your opponents to the spear, dealing solid damage and providing good rage. First glance, this looks like the Mythic Plus choice, but it does surprisingly high single target damage as well. This is a great CC tool, especially for PvP and Mythic Plus. The general ability you get from them, Summon Steward, is a powerful ability as well, giving you access to another health stone basically, and purifies you of harmful effects that warriors normally don't have access to, such as bleeds and diseases. Also, something to note, Pelagos' Soulbind Tree offers a nice ability and increased versatility when not using a repeat ability. This shouldn't be that hard to maintain on both specs. Now we have the other two of the bunch, Night Fae and Necrolords. The class ability you get from Night Fae is a nice AoE tool that is on a longer cooldown than Spear of Bastion, but will deal slightly more damage than it. This is already kind of a problem as Spear of Bastion will pull ahead of this ability if it's used on cooldown. This ability shines in its rage generation and will be especially useful for Fury, lending itself to more rampages. Also, the Soul Shape ability you get is rather ineffective for warriors currently because of the many mobility tools warriors have access to now, and seems lackluster when compared to the Kyrian and Venthyr ones. And lastly, let's talk about Necrolords. This is the worst of the bunch in my opinion. The class ability is ineffective to say the least. You first need to hit it to apply the banner on your back, then hit it again to place the banner. The duration of the banner is dependent upon how many stacks you built with it. Stacks are gained from one of your spec's main abilities, being Raging Blow and Mortal Strike, or from killing mobs. It's basically tailored to be like a group ability for the boys, but if you want to do big damage, then you should definitely go with the other covenants. Increased attack speed fails in comparison to the others. I hardly noticed any damage increases on my warrior. Its real downfall is in its lack of immediate use. Building the stacks can be slow at times, and then you run into the problem of finding optimal times where the group could benefit the most from it. The worst part is you're on a timer when you use it and could lose all of them if you fail to use it in time. Then you would have to build up the stacks again. It just feels super clunky, and you're better off with any of the other 3 covenants. The other ability you get, Fleshcraft, is a powerful absorb. However, its downside is that it's a channel and feels only really useful at the start of encounters. Finding times to sit there and channel it again mid-combat aren't ideal. Now that we've talked about covenants, we can go ahead and talk about conduits. I'm only going to go over the most powerful conduits, which are usually the potency conduits. I highly recommend you go down the 3 potency path, as some of them are just too strong to pass up. Anything buffing your class covenant ability is usually a plus, like the one for Condemn, ROing Punishment, increasing its damage done by 8% for each nearby enemy up to 40%. Ashen Juggernaut also looks pretty solid. Increasing your execute critical strike chance whenever you use it is pretty big. This can stack up to 18% and is not dependent upon a proc. For Fury, Depths of Insanity is a straightforward one that increases the duration of Recklessness by 20%. Definitely can't go wrong with that. The conduits tailored for arms look rather weak to me and will probably need high ranks on them to truly utilize them. As far as defense conduits go, Stalwart Guardian is a solid choice, reducing your major defensive cooldown for your respective spec, aka Enraged Regen or Die by the Sword. Finally, for finesse conduits, Inspiring Presence is the best, with others having more beneficial uses for PvP. Increasing Rallying Cry's HP boost is monstrous and will help with all content, especially during raid progression. Next up, we got Legendaries. I'm not going to talk too much about these, as I made a separate video for Fury one specifically, and will leave a link to it in the description below. There's definitely some interesting ones, especially the Leap one and Spell Reflection one, which will most likely get nerfed. The Heroic Leap one just looks like a fun legendary in general and will lead to higher uptime in all kinds of content. The Spell Reflection one is pretty broken. Having the potential to reduce magic damage for your entire party is essentially a raid cooldown in itself, and with it being such a short cooldown, it is far too strong. Not to mention you can negate damage for a powerful spell and reflect it back when applicable. I think Exploiter will fit seamlessly into your rotation. Your executes will increase the damage of your next Mortal Strike by 25%, stacking up to 2 times. This should essentially require no effort, as you will need to fit Mortal Strike into your rotation anyways now during execute to keep up your deep wounds, and basically just be a nice boost to it. Another one that I think has potential is the Mortal Strike one, which has a chance to apply Colossal Smash for 5 seconds. It's only a 15% chance, so I think it needs to be buffed more to see true value. Arms definitely needs more haste to truly capitalize on this short window as well. I think Fury has more eye-catching ones, my personal favorites being the Siegebreaker one, which can proc off each hit of Rampage. This lends itself to other talent builds and not having to talent into Siegebreaker. The Bloodthirst one, which gives you haste within a 5-second window, can be stalled if maintained properly. Also, the generic one, which procs off Avatar, Bladestorm, and Recklessness, has potential as well for both specs. The possibility for Recklessness with arms kind of synergizes well to help generate more rage, which it lacks. Avatar proccing for Fury can lead to some nice burst windows, and Bladestorm proccing can be some nice burst AoE as well. All things considered, I think Fury will be the better spec of the two. Arms is losing a lot from Corruption, and the difference is extremely noticeable. Test of Might was an interesting playstyle that can be missed by some players. The spend as much as you can playstyle will be replaced with a slow, pull as much rage as you can gameplay that is in Shadowlands. The mastery change is a welcomed one, and the spec itself feels more impactful with its abilities. I just think it needs a little bit more push to get going. Fury will generally be the same with noticeable haste loss, but the slack can be picked up elsewhere. The different talent choices add some variety for Fury, which it lacked in BFA for the most part. Overall, I think Warriors are in a great spot for getting access to far more utility and mobility. Most of the gameplay changes they have made are good, and their damage should be fine for the most part. It really just depends on how the numbers get tweaked. Let me know your thoughts on Warriors. That's going to wrap it up for this video. Be sure to hit that like button if you did in fact like the video. Until next time, dudes. Peace.